5 years ago, when the Vance empire crumbled, I secretly gave my fiancée, Olivia, $100 million behind my father's back. I told her that if she succeeded, she should come back and marry me, but if she failed, I would take care of her for the rest of her life. 5 years later, she returned as a powerhouse CEO of 3 public companies, only to announce during a live national broadcast that our engagement had ended years ago. She had a gentle male assistant by her side and mocked me as nothing more than a spoiled playboy, tossing a $300 million check at me to sever our ties once and for all. All of New York was waiting to laugh at me, but I only responded with a cold smirk. She believed that $300 million could settle the score, but she had no idea of the heavy price I paid in blood to keep her safe over the last 5 years. On the day the Vance empire fell, everyone expected me to walk away from her. Instead, I stood in the middle of a torrential downpour to hold an umbrella over her, shielding her from the world as she slid, drenched and defeated, into my car. I handed her $100 million and told her that if she made it, she could come back and be my wife, but if she failed, I would find her and marry her regardless. 5 years later, she stormed back into New York as a titan of industry. At a massive press conference being aired on every major network, she looked into the cameras and declared that my engagement to her had officially ended 5 years prior. During her time away, she had found someone else to lean on when things got tough and someone to comfort her through the heartbreak. This man was there to cheer for every victory while they weathered the storms of business together and eventually fell in love. Meanwhile, the man who had handed her $100 million lifeline to rebuild her life from the ashes, had become the laughingstock of the city. Olivia slid a cashier's check for $300 million across the table and told me to consider the debt fully repaid. Success had chiseled away the soft innocence of her youth, leaving behind a sharp and formidable sense of confidence. She was a total powerhouse now, radiating a magnetic and almost intimidating energy. It was that exact fire in her eyes that had captivated me all those years ago. Her drive had once pushed me to defy my father's warnings just to help her, and even now, the mere sight of her sparked a primal urge to claim her as mine. I picked up the check with a mask of total indifference and handed it to my assistant. Without breaking eye contact with Olivia, I told my staff to have the accounting department verify the amount to the very last penny. A wave of visible relief washed over Olivia as she watched my assistant take the check from my hand. I noticed the subtle shift in her demeanor and let out a faint, knowing smile. I asked her if she really thought this single transaction settled everything between us. Her posture stiffened immediately, and she addressed me as Mr. Miller, stating with formal sincerity that if I ever needed a favor, I only had to ask. She promised to do whatever was in her power to assist me, though she made sure to pointedly exclude marriage from the deal. She delivered that line with the gravity of a knight swearing an oath, but I wasn't impressed by her performance. I casually mentioned that I had taken a liking to the watch she bought at the Sotheby's auction the day before and told her to have it on my desk by morning. The watch was a unique Patek Philippe that cost her a small fortune, and rumors were already flying that it was a gift for her new fiancé, Leo Perry. I couldn't help but wonder what people would say if that specific timepiece suddenly showed up on my wrist instead of his. When she hesitated, I simply stood up and headed for the stairs, telling her over my shoulder that if her promises were empty, she should just forget I asked. My assistant delivered the watch to my desk the following morning, and I spent a moment admiring the incredible craftsmanship of the masterpiece. It was the perfect accessory for the bespoke Tom Ford suit I had picked out for the charity gala that evening. When I arrived at the event, I was flying solo, while Olivia made her entrance on the arm of her fiancé, Leo. The room was instantly filled with hushed whispers as a wave of gossip swept through the crowd regarding the watch on my wrist. People were dying to know why the gift intended for Olivia's fiancé was being worn by me. Leo eventually approached me with a staged smile, claiming that Olivia had explained the situation and that the watch was just a token of gratitude for my past help. I took a slow sip of my champagne and turned my back on him, deciding he wasn't worth the effort of a conversation. He wouldn't let it go, though, and his voice dripped with condescension as he told me that money couldn't buy a real understanding of love. He bragged that if I actually knew how to love, Olivia wouldn't have replaced me with him. I looked down at my glass and realized the champagne was far too weak for a moment like this. I calmly set my glass down, grabbed a slice of tiramisu from a passing waiter's tray, and smashed it right into the middle of his smug face. The entire ballroom went silent except for the collective gasp of the guests, as every eye in the room fixed on us. Olivia came charging over and pulled a silk handkerchief from her bag to clean the cream off Leo's face, screaming at me to explain why I was harassing her fiancé. I tossed the empty plate onto a nearby table, wiped my hands with a napkin, and gave a simple shrug while telling her that he was ruining my appetite. Leo leaned into his role as the victim, putting on a display of pain tolerance for the crowd. He told the room that he had simply been telling me he didn't mind me keeping the watch if it helped soothe my ego, claiming I was welcome to whatever I wanted. His comments gave my frenemy, Ryder Stone, the perfect opening to chime in. Ryder crossed his arms and announced to the room that I was the same old bully I had always been, thinking my family's wealth gave me the right to take whatever I wanted. A wave of agreement rippled through the crowd as the guests began to whisper about what an entitled, arrogant trust fund brat I was. I kept a polite, plastic smile on my face through the insults, never taking my eyes off Olivia. Her expression was a storm of unreadable emotions, and after a tense silence, she finally told Leo they were leaving. She took his hand and led him out of the gala, and watching them walk away together felt like someone was twisting a blade in my chest. We had been engaged since we were 18 years old, and back then, Olivia was so innocent that a single joke could make her turn bright red. I used to love teasing her, because I enjoyed the reaction I could draw out of the woman I desired. Everything changed the day her family lost everything, as she seemed to age a decade in a single night and developed a hardened, unbreakable stare. I always knew she had the drive to succeed, but I had failed to consider that once she reached the top, she might choose to forget our history. I don't believe in regrets, and I knew that just as easily as I'd helped build her up, I could tear her back down into the dirt. From that night forward, I made sure to haunt her every move, appearing wherever she went in the city. Every time she made a play for a piece of real estate, I stepped in and doubled her bid. And whenever she went after a corporate contract, I undercut her by half. She stood no chance against me in a financial war of attrition. I am Lucas Miller, and I was already the king of New York while she was still scraping by in some backwater town with the money I'd given her. She eventually hit her breaking point and came to my penthouse alone to surrender. Even with tears shimmering in her eyes, she kept her gaze fixed on mine with a stubborn pride. Her voice was tight as she told me that this path was destructive for me too, reminding me that even the Miller family fortune wasn't meant to be set on fire indefinitely. I found it amusing that she was trying to lecture me on financial responsibility. I glanced toward the door and back to her, asking why her fiancé wasn't there to offer his own apology. She bit her lip and bowed her head slightly, offering an apology on his behalf for the gala incident. However, she quickly shifted her tone and pointed out that I was the one who threw the first piece of cake, suggesting we were both at fault. I leaned back against the cushions of my sofa and gave her a mocking grin. I told her that she was right and that I had been far too kind to him that night. I warned her that he needed to stay out of my way because next time I wouldn't be using dessert to make my point. Seeing that I wouldn't be moved, Olivia's expression turned cold as she told me there was nothing left to discuss and that she would see me on the battlefield. Olivia spent the next few days reaching out to the major players in the industry to build a new alliance against me. Unfortunately for her, my influence in New York meant that no one was willing to risk my wrath by taking her side. Besides, her family's previous bankruptcy had left a bad taste in everyone's mouth, and I wasn't the only one who preferred to see her fail. The only thing I hadn't accounted for was the fact that Leo Perry was a social media influencer with a massive following. He posted a video to TikTok and Twitter, accusing me of using my power to engage in monopolistic bullying against Olivia. He sat in front of the camera with tears in his eyes, spinning a tragic story about their struggle to build a business that his followers swallowed whole. My assistant looked worried when he showed me the clip, but I just laughed. I pulled out my phone and called Olivia immediately. I told her she had exactly 2 minutes to make her fiancé take that video down. She tried to argue that he was just telling the truth, which made my voice turn to ice as I asked if she was really willing to sacrifice her last shred of dignity. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. We both knew that the secret of the $100 million was only known to a select few, and if that story went public, she would be the one looking like a fraud. She was a shark in the boardroom, and she knew exactly how to weigh her options, even if it meant throwing her fiancé under the bus. She finally agreed to have him delete the post. My childhood friend, Madison Sterling, had always been a different story. Rumors said she cried for days when I first got engaged to Olivia, and she celebrated the fall of the Vance family by lighting up the Manhattan skyline with an all-night fireworks display. Madison always insisted her hatred for Olivia had nothing to do with me, but we got along because we shared that same ruthless streak. We were two of a kind, even if we spent half our time bickering. That night, she invited me to a high-end club in the meatpacking district to blow off some steam, and she had even gone as far as inviting half a dozen models to keep us company. A few glasses of bourbon in, and I was fully leaning into the Playboy persona the media loved so much. I had a stunning brunette on one side and a wide-eyed ingenue on the other, feeling like life couldn't get much better. When the door to our private suite swung open, I caught a glimpse of a familiar, angry face through my drunken haze. I grumbled to the room, asking who had invited a bartender into our private party. Madison leaned in close and adjusted my collar with a triumphant look in her eyes as she whispered that she was the one who called her. Before I could even process what was happening, Madison called out to the frozen woman at the door, telling Olivia to quit standing around and start pouring our drinks. She then leaned back and smugly whispered that Olivia was desperate for her father's investment and wouldn't dare say no. It was a cruel game Madison was playing to humiliate Olivia for my benefit. I watched in a daze as Olivia picked up a bottle of expensive whiskey and actually knelt on the floor in front of me to refill my glass. I realized then that she was willing to do whatever it took to survive. The flashing club lights played across her features, highlighting a beauty that felt both icy and shattered at the same time. Her eyes remained completely blank, showing no emotion whatsoever, as if she were mentally miles away from this humiliation. Even while kneeling on the floor, she still carried herself with an infuriating sense of pride. I accidentally knocked my glass over, sending the dark liquor splashing all over her pristine white silk blouse. For just a split second, I saw her brow furrow in genuine anger. I offered a fake apology as I watched her chest heave with the effort of maintaining her self-control. Every little detail, from the way she bit her lip to the tension in her shoulders, told me how hard she was working to stay calm. I took a heavy swig of the refilled drink and then suddenly grabbed her by the blouse, yanking her close until our faces were only inches apart. When I moved in to kiss her, she instinctively jerked her head to the side, and that small act of defiance set my temper ablaze. I grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at me, and crashed my lips against hers in a desperate, angry kiss. She fought me off and scrambled to her feet, grabbing a bottle from the table and smashing it against the floor. Shards of glass flew everywhere, leaving a deep, bleeding gash on her leg. She hissed at me that she had already paid her debt and that this level of humiliation was going too far. I looked over at Madison, who scoffed and told her that she would probably be begging on a street corner if it weren't for me. I turned my attention back to Olivia and told her she had heard the lady. Money alone wasn't going to settle what she owed me. Olivia stayed silent as she turned to leave, her leg trailing blood across the floor. Madison's security team stepped in to block the exit, having clearly been told not to let her escape so easily. In that moment, the hallway outside erupted into chaos as the doors were thrown open. Leo Perry came charging into the room exactly on cue, stepping in front of Olivia like a knight trying to save his princess. He started shouting threats at me, swearing he'd make me pay if I laid another hand on her. I couldn't help but laugh at the sheer absurdity of this clueless man acting like a hero. I walked right up to him and started patronizingly tapping his cheek. On the third tap, Olivia's hand shot out and clamped around my wrist like a vice, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous warning. Her eyes were filled with a murderous intensity that I hadn't seen in years. I turned to Madison with a look of mock innocence and asked if I was being too hard on them. Madison assured me I wasn't, reminding everyone that she was the one who had technically stolen my fiancé. The irony was thick. I was standing there with the woman I was still legally engaged to, and the man she was now calling her future husband. I leaned in and whispered to Olivia that since our engagement had never been legally terminated, her public relationship with this man was the real insult. The fire in her eyes suddenly died out, replaced by a hollow, cold stare. She looked me dead in the eye and told me that our engagement ended the day her family lost everything. She then dropped a bombshell, asking if I was really ignorant of the fact that my father was the one who helped destroy her family's empire. I wanted to deny it, wondering why my father would have let me give her the money if he was the one who ruined her. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh and said that to my father, it was all just a sick game of cat and mouse. She accused my entire family of being the same, claiming we were all just trying to drag her back into the dirt. I couldn't find the words to argue because, deep down, I knew she was right. I just sat back on the sofa and watched as the situation finally devolved into a brawl. Madison's security team absolutely demolished Leo. I watched with detachment as he hit the floor, blood blooming from his mouth and a gash opening up on his forehead. Olivia threw herself over him to shield him from the blows, her voice breaking as she begged them to stop the violence. Eventually, they dragged Leo's broken body out of the club, and Madison made a show of being charitable by allowing them to be taken to the hospital. As she was being let out, Olivia shot one last look of pure defiance in my direction. When our eyes met, my heart actually stuttered for a second. The combination of her disheveled hair and that look of utter brokenness hit me harder than I expected. I felt a sudden, desperate urge to be the one standing between her and the world, realizing she had been masking her pain for 5 long years. She had spent so long showing the world a mask of iron will and resilience that I had almost forgotten the girl I fell in love with. I was desperate to find that girl again, refusing to believe she was gone forever. My refusal to let go was fueled by the memory of my first love, but that sentiment turned into white-hot rage a few days later. Olivia went on a national talk show and explicitly stated that any connection between us was a thing of the past. The media set up camp outside my townhouse, desperate for a quote or a reaction. I gave them exactly what they wanted when the first reporter shoved a mic in my face. I told the world that Olivia Vance was a classic case of use and abuse, claiming she took my $100 million to rebuild her life and then ghosted me. The story went viral within minutes, setting the internet on fire with scandalous headlines. The tabloids were screaming about the jilted billionaire and the gold-digging socialite, while Leo Perry was branded as the homewrecker. Leo fought back by posting a video showing Olivia's bandaged leg, telling his followers that I was a violent, unstable maniac with severe mental health issues. He somehow managed to leak a private medical document that confirmed I had been seeing a therapist for years. The real war between Olivia and me was only in its opening stages. I showed up to my company's latest product launch looking sharp in a bespoke suit and a practiced smile. When the press tried to grill me about the scandal, I acted like I had no idea who they were talking about. I told them to stay focused on the business and claimed that names like Olivia Vance and Leo Perry didn't even ring a bell. The journalists went from hungry for dirt to being utterly bewildered by my sudden amnesia. They started speculating if I was having some kind of mental breakdown or personality split since I was ignoring the people I had been feuding with days ago. The more I played the part of the indifferent billionaire, the more the public obsessed over me. This scandal ended up being the best free marketing my new product line could have ever asked for. While the world was losing its mind, I was actually sitting in a quiet VIP hospital room while Olivia rested her injured leg and watched the news. I sat there in silence, focusing on peeling an apple in one perfect continuous spiral. It felt like a small but meaningful win in the middle of all the chaos. I held the sliced fruit out to her and told her she needed to eat something. Olivia looked at me with a warmth in her eyes that caught me off guard and told me to have it instead. I took a large, crunchy bite myself before insisting she take the rest since it was perfectly sweet. She gave me a resigned little laugh and took the apple from my hand. Our quiet moment was shattered by the sound of Leo's voice echoing from the hallway as he demanded to see her. My security detail flatly informed him that Mr. Miller had ordered the room to be kept private. Leo started screaming about being her fiancé and questioned what right I had to keep them apart. Olivia set her fruit down as the noise grew louder. I glanced at the door and joked that her boy toy certainly knew how to commit to a role. Olivia's face returned to a neutral mask as she promised to take care of it. We needed our public war to look as ugly as possible, so our enemies would think she was completely vulnerable. The destruction of the Vance Empire had been a massive conspiracy with many moving parts, and unfortunately, my own family was right at the center of it. Coming back to New York was a massive risk for Olivia, but she was willing to bet everything to get the truth. She was acting as the bait to draw out the people who had set her family up. As a Miller and her former fiancé, I was the perfect person to fund her revenge from the shadows. By pretending to be her worst nightmare in public, I was actually the only person keeping her safe. The hospital entrance was crawling with reporters on the day Olivia was finally discharged. Someone shouted a question asking if I was responsible for her injuries. Leo stepped up and played the part of the hero, telling the cameras that I had hired thugs to attack her and calling me a monster. Olivia just looked down with an expression of quiet pain, letting her silence reinforce his lies. I watched the entire performance from the safety of a tinted SUV parked across the street. My phone started buzzing with a call from the family estate, and I saw that my father was summoning me to a meeting of the city's elite families. It was strange because I had always been excluded from the inner workings of the family business until now. The only reason I had a seat at the table was because my public war with Olivia had become a liability they couldn't ignore. The main agenda was finding a way to neutralize her and force her out of the city for good. The heads of the Miller, Sterling, and Stone families were all in attendance, with Madison and me being the only younger representatives present. I realized then that the conspiracy against the Vance family went deeper than I had ever imagined. I spent the meeting acting bored and scrolling through my phone to avoid suspicion. When the discussion wrapped up, my father asked for my opinion on his plan to use our former engagement to force her into a marriage that would legally bind her assets to ours. My father was a paranoid man who didn't trust our allies and certainly didn't think Olivia was motivated by nostalgia. He only valued control, and since I wasn't in a position to challenge him yet, I simply nodded along with his plan. As soon as I was alone, I messaged Olivia to tell her she should accept the marriage proposal if they cornered her. My father set the trap by inviting Olivia to our estate for what he called a reunion. She knew the dangers, but we both knew she had to walk right into the lion's den to get what she wanted. I felt like a ghost in my own life, sitting there silently while my father used me as a bargaining chip to threaten her. Olivia didn't hesitate when she declared that she would never marry me. Even though I knew we were both playing parts, her words cut through me like a knife. She looked absolutely regal and unyielding as she stood her ground against my father. She refused to bend or show even a hint of fear in the face of his intimidation. My father finally ran out of patience and signaled for his security team to surround her. These were cold professionals who didn't care about her status. I felt a surge of genuine terror and balled my fists as they grabbed her. My father looked at her with eyes like frozen glass, radiating the kind of absolute power that usually broke people. He ordered them to lock her away until she was ready to be more cooperative. I stood there helplessly as they dragged her up to a hidden room on the top floor. The sound of that iron door slamming shut echoed through the halls and triggered a horrific memory from my past. That was the same room where my mother had breathed her last after one of my father's rages. I had spent plenty of time in that dark room myself as a child for the smallest infractions. My mother had died there just for being kind to the staff, while I was punished for simple disobedience. My father's obsession with control was a literal sickness that I had been trying to flee for my entire life. Olivia was right all along. He had only allowed me to help her because he found the struggle entertaining. He viewed our lives as a game and took pleasure in watching people crawl through the dirt. The more someone fought back, the more he enjoyed breaking them. I waited until the dead of night to use my secret key to reach Olivia's cell. Seeing her huddled in the corner of that freezing room caused a physical pain in my chest that nearly took my breath away. She was the one in trouble. Yet she was the one reaching out to cut my face and tell me not to be sad. I could barely speak through my tears as I apologized for being too weak to stop him after all this time. I felt like a failure for letting him hurt her, but she just pulled me into a hug and told me that I had already done more than enough. I knew that mere words weren't enough to make up for my family's sins. We tried to make a break for it through the servants' entrance, but the guards spotted us from above. My father didn't hesitate to fire his weapon, and I felt the world tilt as a bullet found its mark. I used the last of my strength to shove Olivia toward the gate and screamed at her to run while she still could. She hesitated for a split second and looked like she was going to come back for me. I lied to her and said that he wouldn't kill his own son, which was enough to get her to keep moving. She scrambled into a waiting car, but as the interior light flickered on, I realized I hadn't called that vehicle. The man behind the wheel was Leo Perry. I let my head hang as a bitter realization washed over me. I had been a complete idiot to think she was helpless without me. She had her own contingencies and alliances that she had kept completely hidden from me. Leo wasn't just some hired help. He was her true partner in this game. My father's hand suddenly tightened around my throat, cutting off my air and making me think my end had finally come. The sheer rage in my father's eyes was enough to make anyone tremble as he ordered the guards to throw me back in the hole. He stood over me with the same whip he had used on me when I was a boy. I didn't even try to fight back as he began to lash me, each strike feeling like it was shredding my very soul along with my skin. He eventually stopped when he ran out of energy, leaving the whip dripping blood onto the stone floor. I lay there in a daze, barely feeling the blood soaking through my pants from the gunshot wound. My mind started to wander, drifting back to a much simpler time years ago. I remembered a bright spring day and a young, innocent girl standing in the cool shade of a tree. A local kid with bleached hair was trying his luck by handing her a ridiculous love letter covered in stickers. Olivia didn't say a word. She just grabbed the envelope and tossed it straight into the garbage. I was watching from the sidelines and couldn't help but laugh out loud as I smoothed back my hair. The kid didn't take the rejection well and decided to take his frustration out on me by swinging a punch. I dodged him with ease, and he ended up face first in the dirt, which only made me laugh harder. That kid was Ryder Stone, the man who would grow up to be my biggest frenemy and the source of most of the nasty gossip about me. I had fallen for Olivia the second I saw her that day. To her, I was likely just some arrogant kid who didn't know when to shut up. Olivia was never much for small talk, having been groomed since birth to take over her family's massive fortune. Her entire childhood was a series of lessons on leadership and cold efficiency. I was her polar opposite, a walking middle finger to the world because of the way my father treated me. I always recognized that she had the kind of ambition and talent that most people could only dream of. I knew deep down that I was never going to be the main character in her life story. In her world, I was either the antagonist or just a minor character destined to be forgotten. I refused to accept that role because I wanted to be the one who saved her. My father eventually had me moved to a hospital to recover, but the peace didn't last long before I saw a shocking update on the news. The headlines announced that I was set to be engaged to Madison Sterling in just 3 days. I knew exactly what my father was doing. He was using me as bait to draw Olivia out of hiding. Olivia had been absolutely ruthless in the market lately, and the Stone and Sterling families were bleeding money. Even my father was starting to feel the walls closing in on him. My father stormed in my hospital room with his usual entourage of hired muscle. He demanded to know how long Olivia and I had been working behind his back, but I just kept my head down and denied everything. He warned me that if I valued my life, I would follow his instructions perfectly. My only job was to ensure that Olivia showed up at the engagement party so he could deal with her. He left the threat hanging in the air, but I could already feel the phantom sting of the whip on my back. I told him I understood and waited for him to leave before picking up the phone he had returned to me. I stared at Olivia's name for a long time before finally typing out a single message. As I looked up at the ceiling, a strange sense of peace came over me. Growing up with a monster for a father meant that I didn't expect much from life. So if I could save Olivia, that would be enough for me. I felt like my purpose was to pay the debts my family had accrued through their cruelty. By the time the engagement party arrived, I looked healthy enough to play the part of the happy groom. The ballroom was packed with the city's elite, all of them wearing masks of polite sophistication. My father had turned the entire estate into a fortress to make sure Olivia couldn't escape once she arrived. I was well aware that he was tracking my every move, but I just kept playing my part. I spent the evening shaking hands and acting like a man who was thrilled to be marrying Madison Sterling. However, as the hours ticked by without any sign of Olivia, my father started to lose his cool. You could see the anxiety building in his eyes as his plan started to fall apart. He eventually grabbed me and dragged me into a private study, demanding to know why she hadn't shown up yet. I looked him straight in the eye and laughed, telling him that his wait was going to be for nothing. I knew for a fact that she wasn't coming into his trap. The message I'd sent her wasn't an invitation. It was a threat that I would take my own life if she dared to step foot on the property. My father realized I had sabotaged him and reached for a guard's belt to finish what he started. I didn't flinch. I just laughed and dared him to kill me right then and there, just like he had killed my mother. He turned rigid with fury and hissed that my mother had deserved exactly what she got. He raised the belt to strike, but the sound of sirens suddenly filled the air and cut him short. The doors were kicked in as Olivia led a tactical team into the room with weapons drawn. Within seconds, my father and his men were face down on the floor in handcuffs. I stood there in total shock, realizing that Olivia had been planning this raid the entire time. I couldn't help but wonder if she had kept me in the dark because she didn't think I could handle it or because she just didn't trust me. She rushed over and pulled me into a tight embrace, her voice trembling as she asked if I was hurt. I just leaned into her and hid my face, feeling too exhausted and broken to even answer. A crushing sense of loneliness washed over me as I realized how many secrets she had kept. I felt like my trust had been used against me so many times that there was nothing left. I asked her in a muffled voice if I was ever anything more to her than a pawn in her grand strategy. She froze for a moment before leaning her head against mine and promising to tell me everything once I was safe and rested. I closed my eyes and realized she didn't even smell like the girl I used to know anymore. The soft floral scent was gone, replaced by a cold, professional fragrance. I didn't think any explanation would change the fact that she was a different person now. She dismantled the Miller, Sterling, and Stone families with terrifying efficiency, using the evidence she had gathered to erase them from the city overnight. Her revenge was absolute. I spent the next few days in total isolation inside my townhouse, while Olivia stood watch outside. I had sent all my staff home and was down to the last bit of food in the kitchen. I finally decided to face her, so I showered and put on my best suit because I wanted to look my best for a final goodbye. I found her standing by the large windows in the living room, looking out at the city she now conquered. I sat down across from her and realized that my old sense of superiority had completely vanished. I offered her a hollow congratulations on her total victory and mentioned that I had heard the rumors about her upcoming wedding. I told her it was a shame I was now broke and couldn't afford a proper gift. I slid the Patek Philippe back to her across the table and told her to keep it as my wedding present since I wouldn't be attending the event. Olivia stood up with tears in her eyes and begged me to listen to her explanation about Leo. She told me how much she owed him for staying by her side during her darkest years. I just gave her a sad smile and reminded her that while they were struggling, I was living the high life in New York as a pampered billionaire. I never told her that the guilt of what my father did had nearly driven me insane. I spent countless nights unable to sleep, feeling like I was just as guilty as he was for the destruction of her life. The mental health struggles Leo had mocked online were very real, and I had been teetering on the edge for a long time. On the night my mother died, I had actually gone to find her, only to see her celebrating her first major business success with Leo. They looked so happy and perfect together that I just turned around and went home to destroy everything I owned in a fit of rage. Despite my own agony, I made a conscious choice never to interfere with her success or make her path any more difficult. Olivia looked at me with desperate sincerity and promised to make everything up to me. She said I could have anything I wanted, but I cut her off and finished her sentence for her, knowing she was going to exclude marriage again. I went over to the bar and poured us 2 glasses of my finest scotch. I noted that it had been a long 10 years and suggested we have one final drink to settle our accounts forever. Olivia downed the first glass in one go and then grabbed the bottle to pour herself 2 more. I couldn't help but laugh, telling her she was wasting a 50-year-old Macallan by drinking it like water. She didn't say anything, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes as we continued to drink in silence. She eventually whispered that she owed me everything in this life and promised to make it up to me in the next one. I asked her why she was so certain that I would be foolish enough to fall for her all over again in another lifetime. She gave me a sad, awkward little smile and admitted that she was asking for too much. I told her she had missed her chance at a good man, and that was something she would have to live with. We polished off 3 bottles of the good stuff before the night was over. We eventually moved from the living room to the bedroom, and the next morning brought the predictable pounding headache and fragmented memories. My bedroom was a disaster area of discarded clothes, tangled sheets, and empty bottles. I stood there looking at Olivia while she slept, wondering if last night was a moment of true passion or just a massive, drunken mistake. I didn't have the energy to find the answer, so I just got dressed and quietly left the house. I didn't even bother looking in the mirror before I caught a cab to JFK. I walked up to the counter and bought a one-way ticket to Seattle. I finally felt a sense of relief as the plane took off and left New York behind. I was done fighting a war I couldn't win. 5 years of living a quiet life in Seattle had made me a calmer, more stoic version of myself. But all of that composure vanished in an instant when I saw a familiar pair of eyes looking at me across a crowded room. My heart started racing like a wild animal trapped in a cage, shattering the peace I had spent half a decade building. It was a terrifying reminder that some people are just hardwired to love only one person. My friend Pike noticed me staring and asked if I knew the woman standing on the other side of the coffee shop. Olivia looked at me with an icy stare, but I could feel the heat of her anger from across the room. I had no idea why she was the one who was angry, but I chose to lie to Pike and tell him I'd never seen her before. By the time I turned back around, she was already standing right in front of my table, demanding my time. She spoke with a voice that was as sharp as a blade and tried to drag me out of the shop by my hair. I gave Pike a look to tell him I was fine, and we ended up standing under a sycamore tree outside. Her voice cracked slightly as she asked how my life had been, to which I gave a short, indifferent answer. Then she whispered the words I never thought I'd hear. She said she missed me. I could feel my hand start to shake, so I tried to play it cool and forced a smile out. I told her it was nice to be remembered, but then I made sure she saw the silver band on my left hand. I told her I was getting married, and I watched as the light completely left her eyes. She struggled to find her voice for a moment before finally whispering a hollow wish from my absence. I kept my voice light as I told her I had to get going because my fiancé was waiting. I started to walk away, but she grabbed my arm with surprising strength and yanked me back in her arms. She ran her fingers through my hair, kissed me with a desperation that felt both cold and burning at the same time. I had to use all my strength to push her back and create some space between us. I told her to stop and warned her to stay out of my life. I knew she was supposed to be with Leo Perry, as that news had traveled all the way across the country. She apologized through her tears and confessed that she couldn't stop thinking about me no matter how hard she tried. I felt a sudden, heavy wave of exhaustion wash over me as I listened to her. I reminded her that she was an engaged woman and that she had a duty to her partner instead of chasing after him. I told her that this kind of behavior was only going to end with everyone getting hurt. Her eyes were bloodshot as she clung to me, begging me to listen to her as she revealed that she had broken things off with me. She pleaded with me for us to try again. Part of me wanted to give in right then and there, but I forced myself to stay grounded in reality. I told her that I was in love with my fiancé and that there was no room for her in my life. She sounded completely broken as she asked where that left her, her eyes searching mine for any sign of hope. I looked down at the ground, unable to find the words to comfort her as she sobbed that she truly loved me. I watched a single tear run down her face as I told her that if she actually cared about me, she would leave me alone and let me move on. She whispered a final, broken plea that sounded like she was shattering right in front of me. I remembered how I once would have given anything to see her reach the top. She had achieved everything she ever wanted and was more successful than I had ever dreamed possible. Seeing her like this made me proud of how far she had come, and it proved that my initial belief in her had been justified. I gently unpeeled her hands from my waist and walked away without looking back. The autumn leaves were falling all around us, creating a backdrop that felt as heavy and sad as my own heart. 10 years had passed in total, and I knew that some opportunities, once missed, can never be recovered. My father took his own life in a prison cell 3 years ago, and that was the moment I realized my past was truly dead. There was no way Olivia could ever truly look at me without remembering the tragedy that my family had inflicted upon others. Some wounds are simply too deep to heal, no matter how much time passes. We were both better off finding our own paths to peace, as that was the only real closure we were ever going to. May you find peace when bidding farewell to a past that was etched into your very soul, realizing that some people enter your life only to bring brilliance to your years. Ultimately, letting go is the final step in granting your soul the true clarity and freedom it deserves.